The wind carried dust and silence across the empty train platform. A woman stood alone, clutching a worn suitcase and a letter that had been returned unopened. Her name was Clara Henderson, and she had crossed half a country chasing the promise of a man she'd never met. But promises break easy in the West. The ink on the envelope still stung her eyes. We regret to inform you, the gentleman has chosen a younger bride. Younger. As if love had an age limit. As if 38 winters meant her heart could no longer bloom. She straightened her back, watching the last rays of sun melt over the desert rails. A voice behind her, deep, quiet, and steady, cut through the loneliness. "Ma'am, you waiting on someone?" She turned. A man stood a few paces away, hat in hand, dust on his boots, grief in his eyes. He looked at her as if he'd seen a ghost, or maybe a miracle. When she didn't answer, he stepped closer. "They sent you back for being too old?" Paused, then be mine. The wind fell silent, and for the first time in years, Clara forgot to hide her tears. Because in that moment, under the dying light of the prairie, she realized maybe the West still had room for one more chance at love. The morning light crept through the cracks of Clara's small window, laying thin stripes of gold across a table cluttered with letters and dreams that never took root. The clock ticked steady, the way it always did in houses where no one was waiting. She sat with a cup of coffee gone cold, her eyes fixed on the envelope in her hands, creased, smudged, and stamped, "Return to sender." Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal again, though she knew every word by heart. "We regret to inform you, Mrs. Henderson. The intended arrangement has been withdrawn. The gentleman has selected another prospect, younger and more suitable for homestead life." Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Younger, suitable." The words rolled off her tongue like dust, dry, bitter, without mercy. She folded the letter, pressed it to her chest, and let out a sound somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. "Guess I'm too old to bake bread and patch shirts now," she muttered to the silence. A soft creak at the door startled her. Old Mrs. Carter, the boarding-house keeper, peeked in. "Let her come back again?" she asked gently. Clara nodded. "Seems I've been returned to sender too." The older woman gave a sad smile. "Men out there don't know what keeps a home warm. They'll learn too late." She left without another word, and the room filled again with the hum of loneliness. Outside, the train whistle cried in the distance, long and lonesome. Clara rose, moved to the window, and watched the thin line of smoke trail across the morning sky. It called to something in her, something restless that hadn't died yet. She walked to her dresser, opened the drawer her life had been folded away in neat stacks, a faded dress, a photograph of her late father, a Bible with loose pages. Beneath them, she found the first letter she'd sent, the one meant for a man named Elias Kane in Dry Creek, Texas. The paper had yellowed at the edges, but her handwriting was still careful and hopeful. "I can cook, sew, and keep company. I have known sorrow, but I still believe in kindness." She closed her eyes, whispering, "Maybe it wasn't you who said no. Maybe it was the world." When she opened them again, the decision was already made. She packed her suitcase, one blue dress, a comb, and that same letter. Her hand lingered on the doorknob as if it might turn her back, but there was nothing left to stay for. Outside, the dirt road shimmered in the heat, stretching toward the station like a promise. Clara walked slow, every step heavy with what she was leaving behind, yet light with what she might still find. The station master tipped his hat. "Heading west, ma'am?" She smiled faintly. "I suppose I am. Got family out there?" She looked toward the horizon, the word family catching in her throat. "Not yet." The whistle blew again, sharper this time, as the iron beast rolled in with a hiss of steam and the smell of coal. She climbed aboard, settled by the window, and held that return letter on her lap. As the train lurched forward, the town she'd known all her life slipped away. For the first time in years, Clara Henderson wasn't waiting on anyone. She was going somewhere. The sun had barely climbed above the hills when Elias Kane swung down from his horse, boots sinking into the dry earth of his ranch yard. The ground cracked beneath each step. It hadn't rained in months, and even the wind had forgotten to whisper here. He tied his horse to the post, brushed the dust from his hat, and let out a breath that felt heavier than it should have been. Inside the barn, the air smelled of hay and regret. A single lantern burned low, throwing long shadows over tools, ropes, and the ghost of a life once full. On the wall hung a small photograph of a woman with dark eyes and a smile that still hurt to look at. He reached up, thumb tracing the edge of the frame. "Morning, Anna," he murmured. "Another day you ain't here to see." He stood there for a while, until the silence pressed too close. The cows were restless, and the fences needed mending, but the ache in his chest worked slower than any chore. Grief had become part of the routine, like the sunrise, like the dusk. The old ranch dog trotted up, tail wagging lazily. "Come on, Scout," Elias said, scratching the gray fur behind its ears. "Ain't no use standing still. Work won't do itself." By the time he reached the corral, the sheriff's horse was already there, tied up beside his own. Sheriff Dalton, tall and broad, with a grin that could smooth over gunfights, leaned against the fence, chewing on a piece of straw. "Morning, Kane. You look worse than a mule in July," Elias grunted. "That's your way of saying good morning, Dalton?" "Depends." "You plan on answering or just brooding like last week?" Elias climbed up onto the fence rail, gaze sweeping over the barren fields. "Ain't much to say. Crops are dying. Bank's waiting. And the nights, they're too damn quiet." The sheriff spat the straw into the dirt. "You ever think maybe what you need ain't more land but someone to talk back?" Elias gave a tired smirk. "Don't reckon I've got charm left for courting Dot." Dalton chuckled. "Good thing charm ain't required. There's a new agency in Abilene sending brides west. Mail order kind. Women looking for a start, same as you looking for an end." Elias shook his head. "I ain't the kind of man a woman wants. Ain't got nothing but work and ghosts." Dalton crossed his arms. "Ghosts don't keep a man warm, Eli." The words hung there between them, honest and sharp. Elias didn't answer right away. He stared out across the fields, rows of dry stalks bent in the wind, the color of old bones. The thought of another voice in that house, another hand at the table, stirred something he didn't recognize anymore. That night, after the chores and the quiet, he sat at his kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey and a single sheet of paper. The lamp flickered, casting his shadow against the wall. He dipped the pen, hesitated, then began to write. "My name is Elias Kane. I'm 42 years old. I've got a small ranch, a few horses, and more land than I can keep up with alone. I ain't much for talking, but I believe in work and honesty. If you're looking for comfort or fine things, I can't promise those. But if you want a home and someone who'll keep it safe, I reckon I can offer that." He stopped, stared at the ink spreading across the fibers. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't the kind of letter women dreamed of getting. But it was true, and truth was all he had left. He signed his name, folded the paper, and slipped it into an envelope. The next morning he rode into town and dropped it into the postbox outside the general store. As he turned to leave, he caught Dalton watching from across the street. The sheriff tipped his hat, grinning. "Told you, Kane, sometimes you gotta send a little faith down the line." Elias said nothing, just mounted his horse and rode back toward the horizon. He didn't know it yet, but that letter would travel farther than he could imagine, all the way into the hands of a woman who had already been told she was too old for love. The wheels of the train groaned against the rails, a long cry of metal and distance. Clara sat by the window, gloved hands resting in her lap, watching the world roll by in shades of gold and gray. Towns flickered past, a blur of church steeples, windmills, and fields that seemed to stretch into forever. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, pale and thoughtful. The letter she carried was folded carefully in her handbag, its creases soft from being read too many times. Elias Kane, she whispered the name to herself as if testing how it sounded in her voice. Strong, quiet, like someone who belonged to the earth more than the air. Across from her sat a kind-faced woman in a lace bonnet, knitting with quick, nimble fingers. "You headed west, dear?" the woman asked without looking up. Clara nodded. As far as the train will take me. The woman smiled. Ain't we all? I'm Mrs. Winslow, going to join my daughter in Abilene. She says there's work in kind folks. You got family waiting? Clara hesitated. The word family still felt foreign in her mouth. No, she said softly. Just a letter that told me to come. Mrs. Winslow's hand slowed. One of them marriage letters, then? Clara smiled faintly. Was. Until it wasn't. The older woman looked up now, eyes warm with something between pity and admiration. Why'd I'll tell you something, dear. In the West, time don't make a woman old. Only men's eyes do. You keep your chin up, and don't let nobody tell you when you're done. Clara laughed softly, surprised by how easily it came. The sound felt strange, like remembering a song she hadn't sung in years. Outside, the land opened wide, endless plains, rivers cutting through the dust like silver threads, and her heart, for the first time in so long, felt unanchored. As the train thundered deeper into the wilderness, the passengers changed. Miners with calloused hands, wives with babies swaddled in quilts, drifters chasing fortune or running from ghosts. Every one of them had left something behind. That night, when most of the car had gone quiet, Clara sat awake beneath the dim light of a single lantern. She took out Elias's letter, tracing the words with her fingertip. There was something honest in them. No promises of love or riches, just a quiet kind of hope, the kind she could believe in. The train whistle blew long and low, echoing across the plains. She whispered, Dry Creek, Texas, as if saying it would make it real. By morning, the landscape had changed again, red soil, mesquite trees, and a sky so big it seemed to swallow the horizon. When the conductor called out her stop, Clara gathered her things, heart drumming steady and scared. Dry Creek was smaller than she'd imagined. A few dusty streets, a saloon, a church, and a post office that looked half asleep. She stepped down from the train and waited, eyes scanning the platform. No one came forward. No one called her name. The station clerk, an old man with spectacles, looked up from his counter. You're the one came in on the morning train? I am, she said, smiling politely. Clara Henderson. I was meant to meet a man, Mr. Elias Kane. The clerk frowned, rifling through a small stack of papers. Can't say I've seen him in a while. Rancher out past Miller's Creek, right? Don't reckon he's expecting company. Her breath caught. Not expecting, but he sent a letter. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Agency in Abilene closed last month. Whole mess of mail gone wrong. He shrugged. Sorry, ma'am. Clara stood there for a long time, the dust swirling around her boots. The letter in her bag suddenly felt heavier, like a stone she'd carried across a continent. She turned slowly, ready to walk back to the train and let it all go. But as she did, her eyes caught a figure across the street, a tall man beside a corral, steadying a nervous horse. He moved with the slow patience of someone used to pain. Elias Kane. He hadn't seen her yet. Just a silhouette against the morning light, broad shoulders, sun-worn hat, a quiet kind of strength. For a moment, she almost called out to him, almost stepped forward. But something held her back, fear, pride, or the ache of one more disappointment. So instead, she watched him from the edge of the road, heart caught somewhere between recognition and disbelief, as the man she'd crossed the country to find brushed the dust from his hands and looked up, right into her eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. The street between them was quiet except for the wind sliding across the dust. Elias squinted against the sun, the brim of his hat tilting up just enough for Clara to see his eyes, pale gray, steady and cautious, like a man used to watching the world before stepping into it. He didn't know her name, not yet. To him, she was just a stranger with travel dust on her skirt and sadness she was trying too hard to hide. But something about her stillness, the way she stood with her chin lifted and her heart already half broken, caught him off guard. Elias tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he said softly. Clara managed a small smile. "Good morning." "You looking for someone?" he asked, his voice carrying that slow drawl that made every word sound deliberate. She hesitated, clutching her handbag tighter. "I was. I think I may have missed him." That was his way. Never push, never pry. He glanced toward her suitcase. "If you need a place to rest a spell, miss, Mrs. Thompson runs a clean boarding house down the street. Best pie west of the Pecos." "Thank you," Clara said, though the words came out more like a sigh. As she turned to leave, the horse beside him suddenly reared, kicking up dust in panic. Clara didn't think. She dropped her bag and reached for the reins, her movements calm and sure. "Easy now," she murmured, her hand against the animal's neck. "No harm, no noise. It's all right." Elias froze. The horse quieted, as if it recognized something in her voice that he couldn't name. When it finally settled, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "You handle horses," he said, almost surprised. Clara smiled faintly. "Used to, back home." "My father had a few." He studied her then, really looked at her. Not just the lines by her eyes or the tired hands, but the calm underneath, the grace that comes from surviving too many storms. "Not many women step up like that," he said. She brushed the dust from her skirt. "Not many chances to anymore." Something in that answer stayed with him long after she walked away. By evening, the town was wrapped in the soft light of sunset. From his porch, Elias could see the boarding house down the road, its windows glowing warm. He tried to focus on the ledger in front of him, fee, costs, debts, repairs, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman with steady hands and sad eyes. Later that night at the saloon, Sheriff Dalton leaned back in his chair, grinning. "Heard you had a bit of excitement this morning." "Stranger in town stopped your horse dead in its tracks." Elias didn't look up from his drink. "She wasn't no ordinary stranger." Dalton chuckled. "No one ever is till they are." Outside, the moon hung low, pale against the endless dark. The next morning, Elias rode into town early, meaning to send a wire for more seed. But when he passed the post office, something caught his eye, a crumpled envelope lying in the dust near the steps. He dismounted, brushed it off, and frowned at the name scrawled across it, Clara Henderson. The return address read Dry Creek, Texas, Elias Kane. For a second he just stood there, heart hammering slow and hard. The edges were torn, the ink faded, but it was his handwriting, his letter, the one he'd written months ago and never expected to see again. He looked down the street toward the boarding house, the morning light spilling through the windows. A realization settled over him. The woman he'd met wasn't a stranger at all. She was the one who'd answered, the one who'd been told she was too old, the one he'd never got to meet. Elias folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Then he mounted his horse and turned toward the road that led to her door, the wind carrying only one thought through his mind: maybe some letters find their way home after all. Rain fell hard over Dry Creek that night, beating against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists. Clara sat by the dim glow of the boarding house lamp, her suitcase packed once again, the same way it had been so many times before. The letter from Elias lay open on her lap, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. She'd read it over and over until the words blurred, until the ache behind her ribs turned to something dull and steady. She was leaving at first light. The knock at the door came soft at first, then louder. She hesitated. Few men came calling after dark in a town like this. When she opened it, the cold wind rushed in, carrying with it the smell of rain and horses. Elias stood there, soaked through, hat in hand, eyes burning like he'd ridden straight out of a storm. He took a breath, words catching. "You came all this way for a man too foolish to see your worth." Clara's throat tightened. "Mr. Kane, I didn't mean to cause any trouble. It seems there was a mistake. The agency sent me here, but—" He shook his head, stepping forward just enough for the lantern light to touch his face. "No mistake. Only regret. That letter, it was mine. I wrote it. I just didn't think anyone would answer." She looked down, rain dripping from the edge of his hat onto the floorboards between them. You didn't expect an old woman. His voice lowered. I expected nobody. And that's what I got till now. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Inside, silence. Clara's hand trembled as she tried to close the door, but he stopped it gently with his palm. You're leaving, he said. I saw your bag by the window. I can't stay where I'm not wanted. You think I don't want you? She met his eyes then, searching, uncertain. You don't even know me. He took off his hat, set it on the table, and said almost a whisper, Maybe not. But I know what losing feels like. And I know what it means to look at someone and feel the quiet go still for the first time in years. Clara's eyes filled before she could stop them. She turned away, clutching the doorknob like it might keep her standing. You shouldn't say things like that, Mr. Kane. You don't mean them. The train whistle sounded in the distance, a long, mournful cry. Elias stepped closer, rain dripping from his coat. They sent you back for being too old, he said softly. Didn't be mine. The words hung there, raw and trembling in the air. Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then she whispered, You'll regret this. He smiled, just barely. Darling, I've been living with regret half my life. I could use something new. The whistle cried again, louder now. She looked toward the window, the platform lights faint through the storm. One more step and she'd be gone for good. But her feet wouldn't move. The train would leave, the rain would stop, and she'd still be here, standing before the man who shouldn't have found her, yet somehow did. He reached for her hand, rough fingers brushing against hers, hesitant but certain. Stay, he said. Just a day. If by sundown you still want to go, I'll buy the ticket myself. For a moment, Clara said nothing. Then, quietly, she closed the door against the rain. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. The storm still roaring outside, but inside something new, something fragile, began to breathe again. Morning came soft and gray, the kind of light that makes the world look half asleep. Clara stood on the porch of Elias's ranch house, watching mist rise off the fields. The rain had finally broken in the night, leaving the earth damp and breathing again. For the first time in weeks, the air smelled alive, wet cedar, soil, and hope. Elias came out from the barn, sleeves rolled, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. He nodded once, quiet as always. Coffee's hot, he said. Ain't much, but it'll get the blood moving, Dot. She followed him inside, where the house told its own story, one of long silences and small routines. A single plate on the table, a clock that ticked too loud, a photograph tucked beneath a candle that had burned itself short. She touched nothing, but she noticed everything. Elias poured her a cup, sliding it across the table. You sleep all right? The rain helped. He nodded. It always does. The two of them sat there, neither sure how to fill the quiet. Finally, Clara broke it. You live out here alone? Since my wife passed, yes. I'm sorry. He shrugged, eyes on his cup. Happened a long time ago. But the house still feels half hers. She understood that, the way grief lingers, the way it makes space where warmth used to live. As the days stretched on, Clara found herself helping without being asked, fetching feed, sweeping the porch, hanging laundry on the line. The wind tugged at her skirt, the sun warmed her face, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years, usefulness. Later, when she came back inside, Elias was repairing a broken chair by the fire. He looked up, half a smile playing at his lips. Didn't think I'd see the day someone hang laundry here again. Clara set her hands on her hips, feigning sternness. Then you've been living wrong. He chuckled, the sound low and honest. Reckon you're right. Days turned into a quiet rhythm. Breakfast at dawn, chores till noon, supper with the sound of crickets filling the space between their words. The neighbors started whispering. In town, folks said the old cowboy had lost his mind, bringing a mail order bride who'd been sent back once already. But gossip never stopped the sun from rising, and neither of them cared much for talk. One evening, Clara found Elias mending a fence at the far end of the pasture. The sky was painted orange and gold, the air heavy with the scent of rain-soaked grass. She walked over, handed him a canteen, and watched him work. His hands were strong, movement steady, the kind of strength that came from living through loss and still choosing to stay standing. When he straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, she said quietly, "You work too hard for one man." He smiled. "You complaining?" "Just noticing." He looked at her then, really looked. "You make the house sound like it's breathing again." The words slipped out of him like truth too long kept quiet. Clara felt her face warm, but she didn't look away. Maybe it just needed someone to open the windows. They stood there a while, neither speaking, both listening to the wind moving through the grass. That night, as Clara tidied the kitchen, she found an envelope tucked inside a drawer, old, yellowed, and written in a woman's delicate hand. She unfolded it carefully. The ink was faded, but the message was clear. If he ever loves again, let her know he's forgiven. Clara's throat tightened. She folded the letter back, placed it gently where she found it, and whispered, "He already has." Outside, Elias stood beneath the stars, unaware she'd read it. He looked toward the window where light glowed soft against the dark, and for the first time in years, he felt like his house wasn't haunted anymore. It was home again. Summer crept in dry and unforgiving. The sky turned pale and empty, the air heavy with dust that clung to every breath. Weeks passed without rain, and the land began to crack open like old parchment. The river shrank to a thread, the grass lost its green, and even the cattle stood quiet under the weight of the heat. Elias rose before dawn every morning, chasing what little work the sun hadn't yet burned away. Clara followed, helping where she could, patching fences, hauling water, boiling what little they had left for supper. She never complained, not once, though her hands blistered and her skirts turned gray with dust. One afternoon the wind changed, sharp, hot, and strange. The kind that made the birds vanish and horses restless. Clara looked up from the wash basin, sensing it before she saw it. A dark plume rising over the hills, rolling fast. Smoke. "Elias!" she called, voice cracking through the stillness. He was already running from the barn, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Fire," he said, barely more than a breath. "Get the horses to the creek bed." The flames came quick, snapping through dry grass like they had a purpose. The air filled with the roar of it, alive and angry. Clara grabbed the reins of the youngest mare, trying to lead her away, but the animal panicked, rearing back. "Easy, girl," she whispered, but her voice was drowned in the wind. Elias was beside her in seconds, pulling her away as a wave of heat rolled over them. "Go," he shouted. "Get to the house." "I won't leave you." He glared, smoke stinging his eyes. "Don't argue, Clara." But she didn't listen. She ran back, skirts whipping, grabbed a bucket, and joined him. Together they fought the fire till their arms ached, beating back sparks, hauling water, coughing through the smoke. The barn's roof caught, timbers screaming as they gave way. "Elias!" Clara cried, seeing the flames lick toward the stall. 2 horses still inside. She ran before he could stop her. The heat hit like a wall. Her lungs burned. Her skin prickled, but she kept moving. She untied the first, slapped its flank, then the second. When Elias reached her, she was stumbling out, sleeve charred, hair singed, eyes wide and dazed. He caught her as she fell, dropping to his knees in the dirt, cradling her against him. "Don't you dare leave me," he whispered, voice breaking. "Not after I just found you." The rain came at last, not a storm, but a soft mercy that hissed against the dying fire. The world smelled of ash and earth, and when Clara opened her eyes, the sky was crying for them both. Elias held her close, forehead resting against hers. "You're a damn fool," he said, voice shaking. "So are you," she whispered back, and somehow they both laughed. The ranch survived, scarred but standing. The town came to help, bringing buckets, blankets, and pity. The whispers started again, about how close he'd come to losing her, about how maybe God was giving them a sign. A week later, Sheriff Dalton rode out, dust settling behind him. He dismounted slow, hat in hand. "Heard what happened," he said. "Town's talking good about you two for once. Says you fought the fire like a pair that belongs together." Elias gave a small smile. "Talk's cheap, Dalton." The sheriff's grin faded. "Not what I came to tell you." "Bank's making their move, Eli. They're calling the note. You can't pay by month's end, they'll take the land." Elias looked toward the house, where Clara stood in the doorway, her arms still bandaged. "They can't," he said quietly. "Door's in sight. They can. Unless you've got a way to make that deed joint property. 2 signatures instead of 1 might buy you time." Elias stared at him, understanding settling heavy and real. "You mean marriage?" The sheriff nodded. "It'd make the claim harder to seize." "You know how the law reads." Elias turned back toward the house. Clara watched him from the porch, the setting sun catching in her hair. He could see it all now, the fire, the fight, the way she'd stood by him when the world turned to smoke. He took off his hat, voice low as he spoke, mostly to himself. "Guess it's time to stop borrowing reasons to keep her here." Dalton smiled. "About damn time, Kane." Elias started toward the house, each step slow and certain, the wind quiet now, the land still smoking but alive, same as them. The sun rose soft and red over Dry Creek, the kind of dawn that feels like a promise whispered before the world wakes. The air still carried the scent of burned wood, but the land was alive again, small green shoots pushing through the blackened soil, a quiet proof that even after fire, life finds a way back. Clara stood by the window, fastening the buttons of her simple white dress. It wasn't new, just clean, mended in hers. The fabric brushed her wrist like a secret she wasn't sure she deserved to keep. Down below, she could see Elias by the barn, running a comb through his horse's mane, shoulders stiff with nerves he'd never admit. She caught herself smiling, a rare, shy kind of smile. For the first time in years, she wasn't preparing to leave. She was waiting to stay. The small church at the edge of town was half full that morning. Neighbors, curious faces, and Sheriff Dalton at the back, trying to hide a grin behind his hat. The preacher stood ready, Bible in hand, his voice carrying that solemn weight that makes the heart believe. Elias took his place at the front, his best shirt pressed, his boots clean, though the dust found him anyway. When Clara stepped through the door, the room seemed to still. She walked slow, steady, her eyes never leaving his. When she reached him, Elias took her hands, rough and trembling in his. The preacher began to speak, but for the two of them the world had gone quiet, just the sound of their breathing and the creak of the old floor beneath their feet. "Do you, Elias Kane," the preacher said, "take this woman to be your lawful wife, to love and to cherish for all your days?" Elias looked at her, and for once words came easy. "No paper makes you mine, Clara. My heart already did." A hush fell over the room. Clara felt the tears before she could stop them. "And I take you," she whispered, voice soft but sure, "not for what I've lost, but for what I've found." The preacher smiled, closing his book. "Then by the grace of God and this good land, I declare you husband and wife." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, slow, gentle, forgiving. The people gasped softly, stepping out into it, faces lifted to the sky. After months of drought, it was as if the heavens themselves had chosen that moment to breathe again. Elias lifted his hat, looked at the clouds, and laughed, a deep sound that came from somewhere long buried. "Guess the good Lord decided to bless us proper," he said. Clara took his arm, leaning close. "Or maybe he just waited till we were ready." They walked out into the rain together, hand in hand, the world smelling of dust and renewal. The bells rang, the town cheered, and the water soaked through her dress, her hair, his coat, washing away the ash, the sorrow, the years of loneliness neither had spoken aloud. Later, when the sun broke through again, they stood by the fence line, watching the land drink. The ranch stretched wide before them, shining wet and golden under the light. Elias turned to her, brushing a drop of rain from her cheek. "Too old for love?" he asked softly. Clara smiled, eyes glimmering like the wet fields around them. "Maybe." But not too late. The wind stirred gently through the grass, and somewhere beyond the hills, thunder rolled one last time before fading into peace. And there, in the heart of the Wild West, among dust, fire, and rain, two souls who thought their time had passed finally found the place they were meant to belong. And that's the end of this tale beneath the wide western sky. Thank you for watching and for riding with us through another story of love, loss, and hope. Till next time, keep your heart open and your saddle steady. Sunrise.